even if only virtually, it is great to see so many familiar faces. And even for those of you who aren't here by video, it's a pleasure to see your names and know that we're all continuing to persist in these weird times. I'm Jeff Mandel. I'm the president of the Madison Lawyer Chapter, for those who don't know, and I'm really thrilled to welcome everybody to this joint production of the Madison Lawyer Chapter, the Milwaukee Lawyer Chapter, the UW Student Chapter, and the Marquette Student Chapter. This is the second time now that we've done one of these big Zooms, and I think it's super cool, and I'm thrilled at how many of you are here. It's also really wonderful to have some folks from the national office joining us. Megan's been promising to come to a Wisconsin event for a while. I think Jill Dash might be with us, and that's really, really lovely. And I'm particularly excited to welcome Justice Rebecca Dallet to join us at this ACS event. I first met then Judge Dalit in August of 2017, when she gamely and really generously agreed to come to a candidates forum that ACS was sponsoring on the Supreme Court. And the reason that I say gamely and really generously is that the other candidate appearing at the forum was a member of the ACS National Board of Directors. Judge Dalit came and she shared her views of the law, and she introduced herself to people. And I think she knew before she came, and I think she certainly sensed by the time she left the room, that ACS was, exactly the people, her people, the people she was looking for. Because just a couple of months later, when we held, when Craig, who's here today, and I and others helped put together in Milwaukee the first ever ACS National Lawyer convening, there was Justice Dalit coming and meeting people and introducing herself. And what I remember most about the fall of 2017 and the winter of 2018 is that every time I turned around, Justice Dalit was there campaigning and meeting people and putting herself out there. And that is, of course, how you win elections, and how you learn what's going on and put your pulse on the finger of the state. Justice Dalit has, after years of service on the circuit court in Milwaukee County, has now been on the Supreme Court for almost 2 full years. She was elected in April of 2018 in a really, really important and nationally noticed election. And she took office in August of that year and is finishing up, we are in the home stretch. We are finishing up her second full term on the court. From the moment that Justice Dalit was elected, I've been asking her and inviting her to come back and talk to ACS more about her views of the law and about what's happening at the court. And we're really lucky today. She's going to share her views on the law and the legal profession. I think we're going to save what's happening at the court for other days. And we'll get there all in time. But we're really thrilled that Justice Dalit has joined us. And I'm really excited to hear what she has to say. For those of you, I think we've all become accustomed to Zoom of late, but if you use the chat function, you can chat to me or to everyone, but you can also specifically chat to me questions that you might have. And after Justice Dalit's presentation, I will collate and ask some of those questions. Given the size of the group, we've got everybody on mute, but if you send me your questions, I'll do my best to fit them in. And we'll do a little bit of that. And this is a virtual happy hour. So for those who are near your kitchen or your living room and want a glass of wine or something else, please do. Thanks so much. And with that, I'll turn it over to Justice Dalit.
All right, good evening. And thank you for inviting me, Jeff, to talk to everyone and welcome everyone. It's good to see people participating in ACS, and I think in some ways it's actually easier when you don't have to leave your office. So I hope to make this presentation interesting, and I'm happy to entertain questions at the end. My goal in this is to set out for you some of the issues that are facing women in the legal profession. We're going to first talk about the bad side, the negative, the part where we're not attaining where we should be and where we need to be. We're going to talk then about some of the reasons behind that. And then I'm going to conclude with some hopeful possible solutions. So I'm going to start on, I'm mostly going to be on my PowerPoint screen, but I will probably come back and forth a little bit. I'm fairly new to the Zoom sharing, so let me know if there's any issues. All right, everybody see my screen? Yes, okay, good, all right. So I actually changed the title. I started with Women in the Law, Shattering the Glass Ceiling. Then I decided it's kind of like plexiglass. So we'll see which one we think it is at the end, but we'll get going with some of the graphs that kind of paint the picture a little bit. So if you can all see here, we have right now an interesting dynamic. We do have people in law school that are pretty well 50-50 in terms of men and women. And you'll note in that second graph that when they first start out, we do have a pretty comparable percentage of associates and summer associates that are women. You can see then as you move through, though, to some of the other factors that are listed, the managing partners, equity partners, you see these numbers really tail off. And this is April of 2019, so it's pretty current. When we go to look at some other numbers that tell us where women are, we look at deans of law schools, only 35% are women. And then actually this bottom number actually shows you that coming out of law school, these numbers are pretty comparable in terms of who is awarded a JD. It's really 50-50 in 2019. So that doesn't really coincide with what we would expect. We look at women in the judiciary. Now in our Supreme Court in Wisconsin, we are actually going to be, again, 6 out of 7 women starting next year, so starting next term, which is August. We will be the #1 in terms of majority Supreme Court justices who are female in the country, percentage-wise, 6 out of 7. But those numbers really are not representative of what we see across the board. Actually, only 36% of Supreme Court justices across the country are women. And then we look at, we know the United States Supreme Court, your Circuit Court of Appeals, Federal District Court judges. So we hover around that 35%, 36% mark. When we look at Circuit Court judges, state court judges, it's even lower. It is about 22%, and that is about where we are in Wisconsin. We might be a little bit better now. I don't have a full accurate picture as of last year, but we're around 25%. So we still, as I said, we still have a ways to go. Looking at salary-wise, we still come in under men, and that number is pretty consistent across the board. And in terms of equity partner compensation globally, male partners are paid 27% more than female partners. So then we ask, why, right? What's the story here? We've been actually, when I came out of law school, we were at 50%, and that was in 1993. 50% of women graduates as well. So we've had a long time. How come we're not seeing a change? So I think the first area that we need to look at is the work-life balance that really is disproportionately affecting women. I like this chart because you really can see the disproportionality, but I believe this chart does not take into account when there's children added to the mix. So this is just representative of the second shift that women hold in a household without children in terms of more proportion of household activities and household duties that women are picking up. I will note the food, drink, prep being at 37 minutes versus the 17 of men, and that's, you know, what am I going to make for dinner? How am I going to get that handled? And for the women watching this, that is something that, you know, you're trying to do your job and you're dealing with having to deal with all of the extra things that tend to fall on women still, despite very men that want to do their share, it still falls on women's shoulders to some extent. But I think even more so than that is this idea of something that's called the maternal wall. And this is more of a overarching concept that goes above and beyond the day-to-day activities that women do. it's really an onset of assumptions, and they are negative assumptions that come about a woman's career aspirations once she becomes pregnant or once she actually seeks and takes maternity leave. And this is something that I think is even a bigger barrier to scale because of the negative aspect that it holds despite our otherwise good intentions. We also have really disparate challenges. We have stereotypes and we have burdens as women compared to male colleagues. 81% of women in a study said that they were mistaken for a lower level employee, unlike men who did not have that same experience. 54% of women who were asked said they were responsible for arranging childcare as opposed to 1% of men. I'm not sure who did it the rest of the time, but in this one study, that's what we looked at. I already talked about the task of cooking meals that falls more on women's shoulders. And then in terms of leaving work to take care of children, that does tend to fall on women. But despite what we would think in looking at the numbers that we saw, that, okay, so this is about women just stepping away to take care of children, and what's wrong with that, of course. The average time women take off is only 2.2 years. So you would think with that average time being only 2.2 years that we would not have the gap. Women would come back and that would be the end of that. But we do have highly qualified women with degrees, including law degrees, taking time off at some point in their professional careers. The other noteworthy point is that very few women and men take advantage of part-time or flex-time programs. Again, I think this goes back to the negative assumptions that go along with it. I think it goes back to some of the difficulties that go along with the part-time or flex-time programs, perhaps an inability to become partner, the types of cases or the types of work that the person is then completing. But even though those programs are there, a lot of women do not take advantage of those programs. So this is a picture of me and my family. I thought I'd throw a little story in here about my own experience with this. And this was on my campaign literature in 2008 when I ran for circuit court judge. My children at the time were 5, 7, and 9. I had been lucky enough to have the ability to work part-time for a number of years, although I will say that my part-time was never part-time. Covering 3 counties, prosecuting sexual predator cases when I was technically part-time really meant that I was being paid for part-time and really doing full-time work with some flexibility, which I think is unfortunately what flex-time policies tend to turn out to be. At one point when I had all 3 kids in daycare, my salary did not cover my daycare. But it was important work and I was happy to have the flexibility. And then in 2008, I did make the decision to run for judge. And I think when we talk about women in the judiciary especially, and the lack of representation, to run for an election, and now having run statewide, it's even a bigger picture, but to run even for an election in Milwaukee County is something that really takes significant time and effort. And I was lucky to have a husband who I could literally drop everything both in 2008 and again in 2018 and say, pretend I'm not here. Now all these things that I do, you do, and I go run and work and continue to do what I need to do the best that I can. Not everyone's lucky enough to have that kind of support system. It doesn't have to be a spouse, but some type of support system in order to make that happen. And I think from my own experience, I've really seen the difficulties in running. I've seen the disparate treatment in running, the comments that were made, the types of even questions and interviews that were asked of me that weren't asked of male counterparts. I think we have a long way to go in terms of encouraging that, but the more we recognize the difficulties in it and the more we can encourage people to step up and really encourage them to run, I think the better off all of us are. So moving back to some of the other challenges that we have a law firm culture. Now, I don't practice I never practiced in a large law firm, but for one summer. And my husband does, and I'm familiar with plenty of people who do. I think that we still have a lot of work to be done, even in law firm culture, especially larger firms, in terms of ensuring equal access to opportunities. And that's training, it's quality assignments, and it's also client relationships. And some of this comes down to what I'm going to call, what we all are familiar with as an old boys network, which is defined by the Urban Dictionary as an informal system by which money and power are retained by wealthy white men. This is the most base of descriptions, but by wealthy white men through incestuous business relationships. It is not necessarily purposeful or malicious, but the old boys network can prevent women and minorities from being truly successful in the business world. And even not going to that extreme of a definition, I think that there is still a sense of the old boys network when it comes to the legal profession, when it comes to cases being assigned. Who is assigning those cases? Who is the partner responsible for assigning those cases? How did they get to the position they're in? And who are they giving the work to? We also have to recognize that a lot of the social outings that are firm related revolve around activities that may not be appealable to women, and also women may be prohibited from attending given the other responsibilities that they have, or at least it would be difficult for them to juggle. A lot of those revolve around sports and take place after work hours. And so there's a difficulty in just actually getting to some of those activities in order to make those deals happen. One of the books that was really informative in my research was this book called Ending the Gauntlet, Removing Barriers to Women's Success in the Law. I would recommend it if you want to follow up on anything that I'm talking about here. But one of the things that she focused on in this book is the assignment distribution process, and that it really is an impediment to women's success in large law firms. And it's particularly because in these highly prized litigation and corporate departments, women are not getting the kind of high quality work that men are getting. And I think that then results in less moving up in terms of leadership, and then perhaps even making a decision to leave the firm and sometimes the practice of law. The other thing is billable hours. I've had this discussion with my husband so many times. I haven't convinced him yet of how we need to change this. But I really see billable hours as a super frustrating part of a woman achieving in the law for a couple of reasons. First, we look at the fact that is on the screen about the amount of hours that you're actually working in order to bill your 1,800 hours. And this is a really conservative estimate, this 2,400 hours, but it takes into account things like a couple of breaks, a commute, you know, some of the time that you're just not able to bill, you're actually at work for 2,400 hours to bill the 1,800 hours. But the other piece I think it doesn't take into account is how efficient women are typically, because we have to be. Because we have the responsibilities, we have to juggle everything. And so we're really good at managing our time. Unfortunately, in billable hours, you're rewarded for the amount of hours you spend and not necessarily for how few hours you do the project in. You may save the client money. That's not what the firm is interested in necessarily. And this is definitely a struggle. Another issue that I think women come across is both the issue of sexual harassment and also one of implicit bias. And this quote really sticks with me. It was observed by one transgender professor firsthand. Women are assumed to be incompetent unless proven otherwise, and men are assumed to be competent unless proven otherwise. I feel personally, I've dealt with this type of stereotype in running for office, whereas things male opponents could say and do, I was looked at skeptically. I did feel a need to prove myself, both as a young lawyer in the courtroom, that may be generally for all young lawyers, but certainly at times I felt it more as a woman, and certainly in running for office. But it's something we need to keep in mind. I think these are just all awareness of some of this is really the first step in making some changes that are important. And then we really get to implicit bias, which a lot of you I'm sure are familiar with. In this context, well, first, generally, implicit bias is really just, it's our unconscious brain. It's called heuristics, and it is this shortcut method of achieving something in our brains. We're wired that way. It's our reptilian brain, it's experience, it's, okay, I see predator, I run. And there's no time to think, and it's very useful, it's very helpful, it has lots of positives to it, our ability to think and react quickly, and to react based on prior experiences. But when it comes to some of the ways that we think about people, including gender, including race, we tend to have shortcuts that we take that are harmful. One study that I think really describes this phenomenon best was done by Yale researchers, where they sent identical applications for lab manager to male and female professors. So both males and females were looking at these applications. The applications were identical. Half of them were given a female name and half were given male names. And the results were that both males and females said the male application was better, they were more likely to hire him and to mentor him, and they offered him a substantially higher salary. And I think it's important to note it was both men and women who have this implicit bias. It is not reserved to just men by any means. Now, just to prove that to myself, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the IAT. I would suggest, if you are interested in really learning more about implicit bias, this is an excellent website to go on. It's implicit.harvard.edu, and there's many tests you can take. You're taking them quickly. The goal is to let your implicit bias come out, as it were, and to not spend time thinking, and to see what you get. So I took the test. And the test had to do with how frequently, what kind of association you have of men with career and female with family. Me, I consider myself a strong advocate for women. I had a moderate association. So I was in that 32% here of people who fell into the category of having this automatic association of male with career and female with family. So I think this just goes to show us some of the work that we have to do. So now, why do we care? I mean, we all care because we all care about women in our lives, but as a profession, I make the case that we should care even more for making sure that there is gender diversity and female leadership. One of those reasons that we should care is that women have skills that make us effective leaders, especially in the legal field. Women are better listeners than men oftentimes, and listening is a critical skill for lawyers, as we all know. We can be more empathetic and understand that people are motivated by different things. We can encourage better performance from our team by being nurturing. We are better multitaskers and can respond decisively to multiple challenges at once. We're creative problem solvers. We can communicate well. We're easier to approach with sensitive issues, and we understand work-life balance, having to do it ourselves, and can be flexible. We can be better at checking our egos, and we can also be better at being team players. There actually was a analysis of thousands of individuals, and in that analysis, women outscored men on 17 of 19 capabilities that differentiate excellent leaders from poor ones. Some of those being taking initiative, resilience, developing others' potential, inspiring and motivating others. So I think having women leaders help us all. There's also a financial cost to law firms that don't retain and promote women. You know, we see supposedly it costs a firm 150% of a professional person's salary when they quit, in the resources to replace that person. So there's certainly a loss when we have women leaving the legal profession to go pursue other interests. We also have the studies that show that women improve the law firm's national reputation and performance. According to a Morgan Stanley report, more gender diversity can translate to increased productivity, greater innovation, better products, higher employee retention. According to CNN, companies with a high representation of women board members significantly outperform those with no female directors. We've got companies with women in top management positions experience what is called innovation intensity, and they produce 20% more patents than all male teams. And companies with women have higher status. Fortune's most admired companies have twice as many women in management positions. So if for no other reason that a firm doesn't want to do this, they can at least, based on the dollar sign, perhaps be convinced that some changes need to be made. And then women are more likely than men to seek out opportunities to learn and improve throughout their careers. So this is an interesting graph, I thought, which shows the age group that we start out the same in terms of self-development, and then women don't bottom out the same way men do. However, we have this conflicting graph where women rate themselves as less confident than men until our mid-40s. So that's a little bit at odds, and something that I think obviously is something we need to keep in mind. And then having women in leadership position changes the norms. I think we've seen this in all kinds of aspects in our life. When you have people in leadership roles and people as role models, that it can change who we believe are good leaders. And then less gender discrimination, better retention. So what can we do practically about increasing gender diversity in the legal profession, including in leadership roles? Because some of this is not just keeping women in the field, it's really the achievement of leadership roles within it, whether that be the judiciary, the law school dean, the managing partner, or in any other leadership position. We need to talk about how we're going to encourage women. The main way is really through what I would call conspicuous vocal vigilance. So this is not something that's just going to happen. I think the numbers tell us that. If we look at those numbers carefully, we can see that with women coming out of law school at such high rates for so long and not having achieved the type of leadership roles, that it's not just going to happen. That we're going to actually have to make some changes and think about ways that we're going to think differently about encouraging women in these positions. Women need to become better advocates for ourselves and other women. We tend to be very good advocates, certainly in court, and we advocate equally to men, except when we're advocating for ourselves. So that is something that women need to do and to continue. And then I would really talk about networking. I think that something that I learned, and I'll get to that in one second here. I'll start with that screen. So I was lucky when I was elected in 2008. I had been a part of something called the White House Project. It's now Vote Run Lead is kind of taken over that role for nonpartisan women running for office. There are other organizations like Emerge that encourage Democratic women to vote to run for office, but as a nonpartisan candidate, I was able to participate in the White House Project. It was, while I was running, a wonderful opportunity to learn some of the basics, how to network, how to work a room, how to give an elevator speech. We learned from different women how they had succeeded and achieved success and run for office. And it was a great thing to be a part of, running for office. I was elected, and actually within the week I was about to leave for vacation, I got a call from one of the women in the White House Project who told me about this Oprah Winfrey was putting on this White House Project leadership forum in New York, and they were accepting applications and I should apply. And I thought, gosh, well, why not? I was about to leave. I stayed up till 2 in the morning, put together a application, and was selected, which was fantastic. It says 3,000 women applied. This is actually from Oprah magazine, which then they featured us in that magazine. But 3,000 of us applied, and I want to say I think there was 80 of us or 90 of us that went. But it was really enlightening to me this particular weekend, because I learned a lot about some of these phenomena that I had never understood. I had maybe internalized that I didn't think about networking the same way that my husband did, but never really understood that women approach networking differently. So I'm going to go back to the other screen. Men really seem more comfortable mixing business and personal relationships. Inbred, taught, I really don't know, but men really don't have a problem going to something, networking with the goals in mind, and asking for what they want directly. Women tend to have this more lasting personal connection that they're trying to achieve and feel bad about exploiting it. Even just asking people for something, it's, for whatever reason, comes more naturally to men. In a campaign, I had to ask people for every possible thing. I could never ask for money, but everything else. Basically, I had to look at people like, what can I ask this person for? How could they possibly help me? It is such a different rationale for me. I think for a lot of women struggle with how to do that. It doesn't come naturally to us, and it takes getting used to. It takes getting used to making hundreds and hundreds of phone calls a week, telling people how great you are, and why they should elect you and how they can help you. And then when you get no for an answer, asking again. It's something that I think we need to work on. And we definitely need to work on the networking piece as well, and actually taking advantage of some of the networking opportunities. I was awarded the Women of Influence Award last year. There's a great community in Milwaukee put on by the Business Journal. That's the Women of Influence Club of women who have won over the years. And before the COVID-19, we had a number of times that we got together and really just networking with these women who were great networkers, because they had gotten to some pretty amazing leadership places. Was really great to have that type of thing put together. But as women, there's very few of those opportunities, I think, more geared toward us. And also not as many encouraging opportunities for us to go out and do the kind of networking that I think men do. The other big piece is mentoring. Women especially thrive from mentoring. There was a study by Kellogg School of Management found that women who developed a strong inner circle of women were 3 times more likely to get a better job. I try whenever I can to mentor women, both in forums like networking sessions, and actually the Business Journal put on a fantastic one. I believe it was over the winter, hundreds of people, where we did like speed networking. I know that AWL, Association for Women Lawyers, has done that kind of thing. Those are great, but also making myself available to people to ask questions of, and also encouraging other people to run for office and mentoring those people. I think is just a really important thing that we as women, and it's not just women at all. This mentoring study, I don't have the numbers in front of me. I know they weren't all women mentors, and I can say personally that the people who mentored me on my path, my career path, were men. There were certainly women along the way, but I have had some very strong mentors, both from when I first worked on a political campaign of Lee Fisher, who ran for Attorney General of Ohio, and I was his Senate page. And there was a man who was his legislative aide who encouraged me and who encouraged me to apply to law school and helped me with my essay and helped me there. To Tom Schneider at the DA's office brought me over to the U.S. Attorney's office. Judge Jeff Kramers helped me when I was applying to first be a court commissioner before I ever ran for office, and really helped me network and move through. So it really doesn't matter who it is, but I think mentoring is just a huge piece here that we need to make sure that women have along the way. And then firms really need to be transparent about a commitment to hiring women. Again, this goes back to this constant vigilance. This is not just going to happen. You can't just say, well, we've got some women and we like women and we always interview women. Really, there has to be a transparency there that we are trying to attain this percentage, or we're going to make sure that a certain percentage of candidates that we look at are women. And again, this is all geared toward women. This goes as well for minorities too, to really encourage the representation that we need in our firms. Impact for leadership for women suggests some of these types of steps that firms take to create this welcoming culture. One is the transparency, having advocates monitoring and promoting change within the firm, a critical mass of diverse members on the compensation committee. And I think that this is a real key one. If you look at committees in law firms, the women tend to be on recruiting committees, social committees, whether they volunteer themselves for that or whether they're asked to be on that. Being members of committees like compensation are places that women need to be. Developing systems to develop fair and accurate origination and billing credits so that women are getting credit there as well, and not just for some of these opportunities that may be after hours work that they can't participate in. And then implementing the formal succession protocols. And that goes back to who are the people in these firms that are doling out the work. My limited experience in looking at other firms is it's just whoever happens to volunteer to do that. And that may not be the person who's the best to do it. And who they pass it on to may just be the guy that they always handed the work to. And okay, I'm going to step down from this role. Now you can lead this team in our firm. And now you're in charge of giving the work. So if we can come up with formal protocols to make sure that the women are taking part in that and encouraged to continue in a leadership role, that's really important. Research does show that the presence of only 1 to 2 women on a decision-making body can lead to marginalization of minority participants. And then developing a system to resolve allocation of any disputes and implementing training for those making evaluation and compensation decisions so that it's not just done without that type of training. This is a really interesting project that I didn't check before I got on today. I know that Hush Blackwell has met this. I'm not sure if any other firms in Milwaukee have. There are nationwide firms that have. But this is something called the Mansfield Rule. It started out in sports with football, I believe, in terms of coaches and the amount of coaches that would be interviewed that were going to be minority candidates so that there was representation. This is a law firm certification where law firms get certified under this rule if they consider at least 30% of women, minority, and LGBTQ lawyers for significant leadership roles and inclusion in new business pitches. I think it's important it's not just leadership roles, but also new business pitches so that women are encouraged to take part in that. But there's no reason why all the firms can't be there and participating in that type of practice to encourage women leadership. I haven't played this yet. I don't know if anyone has this one, but there's a gender pay gap game, Monopoly. I just put that in there for fun, but I think it reminds us of that pay gap. But the last thing I think we can do is really promote and better use the flex time policies that I talked about earlier. They include working remotely. I think it's going to be really interesting see how this virus and our response to it changes how we work. I think in law firms, it may help women in the end, because it really, I think, solidifies for us that you don't always have to be in the office, that you can be productive after you put your kids to bed, or at 4 in the morning if you want to get up and do it then, before the kids are awake, and that you can be just as productive working remotely as you could be sitting in an office where people see you. Staying connected during sabbaticals. Again, think about that 2.2 years is all that women are out. How do we connect with women who are not in the workforce right now to make sure that they come back? How can we keep them engaged? What can we do to make sure that they don't leave fully? And then I think the millennials are going to help us too. I think that the millennials are demanding more flexibility, and I think with more flexibility, we will have better outcomes. So the good news is, the best good news is, women who make it to the top tend to stay there. So we can think about ways to continue to help women get to the top in all of the areas of the legal profession. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions or comments that anybody has.
Well, thank you. You know, as someone who works in a law firm, there's a lot that's sobering here, but there are also a lot of really interesting questions. And if people continue to chat me questions, I will share it. Let me start with this one. I was heartened to see you citing data from the Gavel Gap early on, which, you know, was an ACS initiative, and I know that all of our Wisconsin chapters have held programs on trying to close the Gavel Gap. And I was struck by you saying that flex time is full-time work with less pay and some flexibility. That is certainly the experience that I have seen. But one of the things that seems challenging to me is that the judiciary doesn't necessarily provide that kind of flex time. Even if it's sort of in name only, how do we move toward closing the Gavel Gap if it is so difficult? You know, what is your experience in how you balance and juggle when you're the judge?
Yeah, that is a really good question. When I ran for office, as I showed you, my kids were 5, 7, and 9, so they were in school. And then running for Supreme Court, my kids, it was 2 years ago, so they were 16, 18, 20. And I still had a lot of challenges. Actually, I wound up missing my senior year, my daughter's senior year, all of her activities and everything. I think running for office and being a judge are two separate questions, I guess. The running part, very challenging, I think requires, unfortunately, really just an ability to just having to check out of some of the things that you're doing family-wise and balancing-wise to focus on the election. I actually am doing a presentation tonight also to introduce an exhibit for Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And one of the quotes that she has, which I think is a fantastic one, is that women can have it all, just not all at the same time. Which, I mean, it's a little disheartening. I want it all at the same time, but it also is gives you a little bit, you basically focus on the part of your life that needs the attention at that moment. And that's how I've always been able to approach it. If it's a campaign and it needs my focus, I may not make it to that gymnastics meet, or I'm not making dinner. I gave up laundry when I ran for judge the first time. I never took it back. Never took it back. I do not do the laundry in my house, which is great. But I mean, these are the kind of things that, you know, it's hard. Now, the other question that you're asking is, what do we do as judges once you're actually in the role? Mm-hmm. How is that flexible? It is not. Yeah, I guess it depends on your county. Milwaukee County, I would not call it flexible at all. You know, we get good time off, good sick leave. If there's an emergency, I've certainly had emergencies come up along the way. I remember having to leave for a kid, you know, broke their arm or whatever. Something will give, but it's hard. And we should think about, are there ways now, especially with this remote world that we've really been diving into, can we think about ways to do some of these hearings remotely? you know, and continue to do that. And maybe there's ways we can talk about women being able to be flexible with hours on the bench, because that's something I don't think anyone has really talked much about.
Well, I hope so. I mean, it's really fascinating. I think that one of the, whether it's a stereotype or it's a truism, you know, is that women leave the law firm world and go into government because there's more flexibility often. But when we talk about that, we're not talking, we're almost exclusively talking about the executive branch and agency work and things like that. We're not talking necessarily about legislative work, which can be incredibly, you know, that the time demands change with the seasons. And the same thing is true of the judiciary. We don't talk about these things where people would need to run for office, and then where the offices themselves can be tremendously demanding.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And even the nature of the legal profession in litigation. I was a prosecutor, and I was, you know, working, if I had a jury trial, I was in jury trial in whatever county I was in. I wasn't able to go leave and, you know, and have that flexibility that I'm supposed to have. So yeah, I think some of it's the nature of the profession, but some of it we need to think of ways to make it more flexible.
Well, I was thinking of that when you talked about the running for office piece, that is familiar certainly to litigators, but I think also to business lawyers. When you have it, right, we're all used to work ebbing and flowing, and there are times when there's something so intense that for some period of time, it is really all that it is the primary thing that you do and think about.
Right, and in that regard, I would say the support systems that women can build around themselves, and whether they're a spouse, whether they're friends, whatever those support, family, parents, whatever those support systems are, because we can have it all, but not all at the same time. So if today the goal is to focus on that client and do what we need to do for that client until 2 in.the morning, and we can't take care of the other responsibilities, who do we have to lean on to be able to do that?
Do you sort of in a gender sense, as you meet other judges and justices around the country, do you find a difference between those who need to run for office and those who are appointed? I mean, some of the things that I heard you say, and maybe this is just my own read on it, but as you talked about those skills and learning to master certain skills and running for office, it sounded like you had to master certain skills that are typically more seen as male or might come more easily to men overall. And I wonder if going through that changes you as a lawyer and you as a judge in a way that you might perceive differently in people who don't run for office?
Well, that's an interesting question. I don't think I've thought of that in terms of who I meet. I have definitely been asked the question of whether we should have judicial elections or not. After this last election, I wonder if we should, but at the same time, I still believe in judicial elections, at least in principle, because of the skills that you do gain, and not just the skills, but also the involvement in the community that is necessary. I think that having to run around the state, having to meet different groups of different people and understand how they view the judiciary, what their concerns are, how they're impacted, is really important. And I do think in my career, both on the circuit court bench and on the Supreme Court, I draw on those experiences. And I do think that the skills that are required do serve me well in being a public figure, because I don't see my job as ending when I write something on a page that then gets published as an opinion. I think part of my responsibility is what I'm doing here tonight, and is talking to the public about the judiciary, about the law, about important issues. And I think that having those skills running for office really helped to solidify the skills that are very helpful in that regard.
So obviously the circuit court and the Supreme Court are very different institutions, and they operate differently. They have different rules, they have different purposes. But you mentioned at the beginning as a point of pride how many women we have on our state Supreme Court, and we were so close to having 7. You know, to go back to Justice Ginsburg, right? When will there be enough? When it's all of them.
That's my other favorite quote of his. When will there be enough? Never. There were men for so long, and no one thought anything of it.
you know, do you see, what are the differences you see there? You know, what kind of leadership was there at the circuit court level? Were there differences in how the circuit court was run? Because there was, overall in Milwaukee County, I think we still have more male judges than female judges, versus how the Supreme Court operates and things like that?
That one's hard. I mean, and Milwaukee County's had some great chief judges who've been women. Now there's Judge Trigiano, there was Judge White, there was Judge Brennan. You know, so it's hard to compare leadership there. You know, I think Milwaukee County, I think we're at about in the 30%, 35. I'd have to look at the numbers again, but about 35% is about right. Getting a little closer. I didn't feel like there weren't other women. You know, will tell you that sitting on the bench as a woman, there are certainly times that there were mostly litigants who would approach, and sometimes lawyers too, who would talk to me in a way that they would never talk to a male colleague. But some of that, I think, as we change the face of the judiciary, and this goes for minority representation as well, some of those heuristics that I keep pronouncing wrong, those shortcuts in our brain, those will change, I would hope. As we see more women in that role, then it's more expected. Then when I'm running for office and I get, you don't look like a judge, or you don't look like a justice, and I want to say, well, what exactly are you saying? That a woman doesn't look like it, that someone who looks maybe younger doesn't look like that. So some of that, I hope that with time and more women in these positions, that we can make those changes.
So that's fascinating, because of course, on the campaign trail, you have one set of challenges when you get comments like that, because of course you're asking for people's votes, and you don't want to be too snarky or, you know, come off in a way that puts people off. But on the bench, you have a different set of challenges when that happens, whether it's a litigant or a lawyer. How do you balance the desire to model good leadership and help correct that behavior with the desire to, of course, be fair and try not to hold that against the argument that's in front of you? I mean, certainly, without naming any names or specific cases, I've noticed briefs before your court of late that I felt had sexism in them.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just goes kind of with the job. If you can't be impartial, you shouldn't be a judge. I mean, easier said than done, I guess, but you do have to kind of take yourself out of that. And the same way I do when I disagree with my colleagues, and maybe it's a little heated, I still have to be able to step away from that and really be able to work with them. And I think it's the same for any good judge, and we have great judges in Wisconsin, people who really do want to be there and who really try to do the right thing, I think, for the most part. So you have to put aside sexism in that context. I think you can bring attention to it in a way that's not snarky and doesn't hold that against that person, so that we're all aware of that type of thinking and that that's coming into play, but at the same time to kind of put it aside and move on to the bigger issues that are in front of you.
Do you find that that gender plays a role in building coalitions or the collaborative process of refining opinions on the court?
It's hard to say because so many of us are women. But I do think overall, as women, I think sometimes we are open to collaboration. I mean, you can't make generalizations, obviously, but I think that there's sometimes a different way of looking at things that can be explored. Again, there's no generalizations. I also would like to think in terms of just the judiciary too, just trying to look out for one another. I mean, I always felt that in general, people were trying to look out for one another in Milwaukee County, but the women in particular, and just trying to make sure that we had each other's backs. And I think that's an important aspect of it as well.
That's nice. I hope that's true. What let me ask you one more, and then we will let you go on. I know you have another engagement tonight. What unique challenges do you see for women of color in these kinds of professional engagements, or for immigrants, for first-generation Americans, for first-generation college graduates, even I suppose for people who come from families who have college graduates but they're first-generation lawyers? Those all those layers can add additional challenges, and how can we work to help ameliorate that?
Well, I think some of the points that I talked about apply as much so, if not more so, to minority populations. Implicit bias tests, you can go on and take implicit bias tests for each type of race, different types of individuals, and realize that most people carry bias in lots of different ways. And I think that we need to be vigilant and really look for ways to both encourage, to mentor, to encourage leadership opportunities, to ask. With women, there's an interesting phenomenon about running for office also, that women tend not to run unless they're asked, which is a very interesting concept. I actually was asked to run for circuit court, and by multiple people before I got it in my head that, oh yeah, that's something. I mean, I always wanted to. It was just, well, not right now, and things are hard right now, balancing, and how am I going to do all that, and how? Oh, it was very interesting to me. I don't know if minorities feel the same type of response, but I think we should be asking, right? I mean, who are we asking now? I will give Governor Evers a huge amount of credit, I think, and the committee that's selecting doing appointments for the judiciary across the state of Wisconsin right now. I think they are asking, encouraging, asking, promoting, and finding some fantastic candidates. And these people are out there. I think part of it is tapping into different populations. And when we have representation of minorities at such high levels in our criminal courtrooms, and we don't have a face on the bench that they can relate to, we should. It makes a huge difference, I think, for people to be able to look up at a judge and say, they get me, or they might understand me, or I see that, look, wow, that I can do this. Maybe me, maybe my kids, my family. I just think that's something that you can't underestimate the power of that. And I think that in all ways that we can think of to really promote and encourage and mentor people of all kinds of diversity, the better off we all are in our legal profession.
I think that's wonderful. I want to echo your thanks and praise to the Judicial Selection Committee, which is doing a great job with Craig and others who are with us today and involved in ACS. As someone who also is trying to pay attention and is reaching out and encouraging people to apply for some of those openings, how long did it take you to get comfortable with that idea? When people did reach out, just as a sort of rule of thumb or a heuristic based on your own experience, did it take a year? Did it take 3 asks? Did it take 5 asks? Did it take? It's a big leap to decide that you're going to run for judge.
Okay, it's funny that you asked that, because it was like a couple days, but being bombarded, because I was at a conference with all these judges. I was the presiding court commissioner, and everyone was like, you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do this. And so by the end of the weekend, I'm like, all right, I'm going to do this. But I can't say that that's that might be unique to me. I've helped people make that decision to run, and I'm happy to continue to do it. I do it still. I've nudged and encouraged, and there's a couple people sitting on Milwaukee County bench that I hope that I was the one that really, gave them a kick in the butt. And maybe there's somebody who's going to be a Supreme Court justice starting in August that I helped to kind of, give that nudge, but that's what we all need to do. Think about all of us doing that and think about how much impact we could have.
Oh, I can't agree more. We need to think about the bench we want and the society we want, and we need to encourage people to help make it happen. You know, you have such and from the moment I first met you, have such a tremendous amount of confidence and amount of joy in what you do and bringing to it that I can understand why people that you nudge would take it seriously and feel that. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for doing this. You know, I look forward to continuing our relationship between you and many of your colleagues at ACS.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Have a great night. Thank you all for joining us. There is CLE credit, so you know, we've filed all the paperwork, or we're about to, and you can report this. This was really wonderful. We're glad so many of you could come. I hope everyone stays safe and well, and that we will be able to get together in person soon. Thanks, everybody.